The night had settled over the small town in a way that felt almost unnatural. Streets that usually carried the faint hum of traffic now seemed swallowed by silence, as if the world itself had chosen to hold its breath. The old community library, where I often studied late, stood like a forgotten relic at the end of a narrow road. For me, that place had always been a refuge, a quiet corner where I could escape the chaos of exams and the noise of the outside world. But that night it felt different. I was 17 at the time, the kind of student who loved books more than conversations. My parents trusted me enough to let me stay at the library until closing hours, but this time I stayed longer than I should have. I remember looking at the wall clock, 10:15 p.m. The librarian had already left, locking the main door from outside, as I had promised I would exit through the side gate. That should have been normal, but the silence that followed was not. The library's air carried a strange heaviness, as though every shelf and every shadow was watching me. I gathered my notes quickly, stuffing them into my bag, when I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the wooden floor. At first I thought it was my imagination. The building was old, after all. Wood creaked, walls groaned. But then the sound came again, clearer this time, moving slowly between the aisles of books. My throat went dry. "Hello? Is someone there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. No reply. Only silence. I walked toward the main hall, my footsteps echoing in a rhythm that didn't belong only to me. That's when I noticed something that froze me in place. The overhead lights, which had been flickering faintly, suddenly dimmed as if a hand had twisted the switch. One by one, the lamps above the aisles went out, swallowing the shelves in darkness. Only the faint glow near the exit remained. I clutched my bag tighter and hurried toward the side gate. But when I reached for the handle, it refused to budge. The gate, which should have been unlocked, was jammed shut. I shook it harder, panic rising in my chest. That's when I heard it again, this time closer. The footsteps were no longer slow. They were hurried, uneven, as if something or someone was running toward me. I spun around. Nothing. Only the dim hall filled with endless rows of books. But then I saw it. Between the shelves, just for a second, a shadow passed. Not like the shape of a person, more like something stretched and distorted, bending unnaturally as it slipped out of sight. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it would give me away. I backed away from the gate, pressing myself against the wall. My phone was in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen flickered and died before I could even turn on the flashlight. The battery had been full just an hour ago. The silence returned heavier than before, until the sound of whispering filled the air. Dozens of overlapping voices, soft but sharp, circling around me. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were calling me, urging me deeper into the dark. I did the only thing I could. I ran, through the aisles, past the shelves, not daring to look behind me. My footsteps thundered across the old wooden floor, but the whispers followed, chasing me like a storm. I reached the central reading area, where moonlight spilled faintly through the glass windows. I stopped there, gasping for breath, when I heard it again. The footsteps. But this time, they weren't behind me. They were above me. I tilted my head upward. There, crawling along the ceiling like a twisted shadow, was a figure. Its limbs bent backward, its face hidden, moving with a speed that no human body could ever manage. It clung to the ceiling beams like an insect, its head snapping toward me with a sound that resembled bones cracking. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat. Before I could stop it, the figure let go, falling from the ceiling. I didn't wait to see it land. I bolted for the main door, slamming my shoulder against the lock again and again, until, with a loud snap, the rusted latch gave way. Cold night air hit my face as I stumbled out onto the street. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest open shop, where the startled shopkeeper watched me collapse against the counter, shaking and gasping. Later, when I told my parents, they dismissed it as stress from exams. The library remained closed the next day, officially because of maintenance. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I have never stepped into that building again. It happened 3 summers ago, in a quiet village where life usually slowed down with the heat. I had gone to visit my cousin, who lived near the edge of the forest. His house was old but charming, with creaking wooden floors and wide windows that opened to the thick, endless trees. At first, everything about the place felt peaceful. Days were spent laughing, eating homemade food, and wandering down dusty paths. But nights were a different story. The villagers whispered about the forest after dark. They warned never to step beyond the tree line once the sun dipped. I laughed it off, thinking it was just superstition. But my cousin's face would pale every time the topic came up. "It's not safe," he told me. "You'll understand soon enough." One night when sleep refused to come, I sat near the window, staring at the shadows of the forest. That's when I noticed something strange. Between the trees, a dim light flickered, as though someone were carrying a lantern deep inside. The light swayed back and forth, drawing me in like a moth to a flame. Against every warning I'd heard, I slipped out of the house, telling myself I'd only go a little way. The night air was thick with the smell of earth and damp leaves. Crickets chirped, but beneath their chorus was something else, a faint hum, low and unnatural. The lantern's glow seemed always just a little further ahead, pulling me deeper into the woods. My heart beat faster, but my curiosity pressed me onward. After what felt like an eternity, the trees opened into a small clearing. And there it was. Not a person holding a lantern, but a figure standing perfectly still in the center of the clearing, its face hidden beneath a hood. The light didn't come from a lamp, but from its hands, glowing faintly like embers. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. But before I could, the figure tilted its head, as though it knew I was there. Slowly, it raised one arm and pointed directly at me. The humming grew louder, filling my ears, until it drowned out every other sound. Panic shot through me. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, and scrambled to my feet. The glow surged brighter, lighting the trees around us. And then, with a sound like air being sucked from the earth, the figure vanished. I thought I was safe, until the whispers began. They came from all directions, dozens of voices calling my name, hissing through the leaves. I ran as fast as I could, branches clawing at my arms and face. No matter how far I went, the voices followed, chasing me through the darkness. The path back seemed endless, twisting in ways it never had before. Finally, through the blur of fear, I saw my cousin's house. He was standing on the porch, lantern in hand, shouting for me. I burst from the forest, collapsing at his feet. He pulled me inside and slammed the door, his face pale and trembling. "You went into the forest," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Didn't you?" I could barely nod, my body still shivering uncontrollably. He bolted the window shut, muttering prayers under his breath. That entire night I heard it, the scratching at the walls, the whispers outside the glass, as if the forest itself had followed me home. The next morning, the villagers avoided my eyes. No one asked what had happened, but one old woman pressed a charm into my hand, a small wooden carving wrapped in red thread. "Keep it with you," she said. "Once they've seen you, they don't forget." I stayed only one more night in that house, too afraid to even look at the trees again. When I finally left the village, I thought the nightmare was over. But sometimes, even now, when I close my eyes, I hear it again. That low humming in the distance, reminding me that the forest is still waiting. It was the winter of 2015 when I moved into a rented apartment in the city. The building was old but cheap, and for a college student like me, affordability mattered more than comfort. The landlord assured me that the place was quiet and safe. At first, I believed him, but by the second night I realized the silence in that apartment wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, with cracked walls and windows that rattled whenever the wind blew. The first night passed without issue, but on the second night, I woke up to a sound, someone knocking. It was soft, deliberate, coming from the wall near my bed. I froze, staring at the plaster. The knocking came again 3 times, as if someone was trying to get my attention from the other side. I told myself it was just the old pipes or maybe a neighbor. But when I asked the landlord the next morning, he looked at me strangely. "That apartment has no next-door unit," he said. "It's the corner wall." That night I tried to sleep with headphones on. Around 2 a.m., I felt something cold brush across my arm. I shot up, pulling the blanket tighter. The air felt icy, my breath visible in the dim light. And then came the knocking again. This time, louder, sharper. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, though I hadn't set any alarm. When I picked it up, the screen displayed a single notification. "Let me in." I dropped the phone instantly, my hands trembling. How could a message like that even appear? I didn't know whether it was a sick joke, a glitch, or something worse. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat upright, staring at the wall until the first light of dawn. The next day I packed my bag, ready to leave. But curiosity held me back. I wanted answers. That evening, I visited the old man who lived downstairs. He had been in the building for decades. When I asked him about the apartment, his face darkened. He hesitated before finally saying, "A young woman lived there years ago. She disappeared one night. No one knows where she went. Some say she never really left." My blood ran cold. Still, I wasn't ready to believe. I returned to my apartment and decided to record the night. I set up my phone camera facing the wall and tried to sleep. Hours passed in silence until the familiar knocks began again. 3, then 4, then 5. The room grew colder. My chest tightened as if something heavy sat on it. And then, faintly, from the wall, I heard it. A woman's voice. "Please, let me in." I shot upright, heart pounding. The knocking turned into pounding, so loud it rattled the frame of the bed. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. For a second, the room was illuminated, and that's when I saw it. A pale hand, impossibly thin, was reaching out from a crack in the wall. Fingers clawed at the plaster, nails scraping against it as if trying to pull the rest of the body through. My scream tore through the silence as I bolted from the bed and ran straight out of the apartment, not even bothering to grab my things. I stayed at a friend's place that night, too afraid to return. The next morning, when I went back with my cousin, the wall looked untouched. No cracks, no marks, nothing. But when I checked my phone, the video recording was still there. And on it, clear as day, the knocking could be heard. At the very end of the clip, before the screen went black, a whisper filled the room. "I'm still here." I moved out immediately. I didn't care about the deposit or my belongings. To this day, I avoid that street entirely. Sometimes, though, late at night when the world is quiet, I hear it again in my dreams. The knocking steady and patient, waiting for me to let her in. The rain had been pouring for hours, drumming against the windows of the small inn like 1,000 restless fingers. Daniel, a traveler on his way to the mountains, stopped there for shelter. The building stood isolated by the roadside, its cracked wooden sign swaying dangerously in the storm. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and smoke. The innkeeper, an old man with pale eyes, greeted Daniel with a forced smile. "You'll stay the night?" he asked in a voice that rasped like dry leaves. "Yes, just one night," Daniel replied, tired from the long journey. The inn had many rooms, but strangely the man offered only one. The last room, upstairs. "No one else stays there." Daniel didn't argue. He climbed the creaky staircase, his boots echoing in the silence. The hallway stretched longer than expected, dim lamps flickering as if they were struggling to breathe. At the end stood a heavy wooden door with a black iron handle. Inside, the room was surprisingly clean. Too clean. A single bed, a mirror on the wall, and an old wardrobe. Daniel set his bag down and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling crawling up his spine. As midnight approached, the storm outside grew violent. Daniel lay in bed, unable to sleep. That's when he heard it, a soft tapping from inside the wardrobe. At first, he thought it was just the wood expanding in the dampness, but the sound grew louder, rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. His chest tightened. Gathering courage, Daniel walked to the wardrobe and pulled the door open. Nothing, just dust and old coats hanging limply. He laughed nervously and shut it again. Moments later, he glanced at the mirror on the wall. His reflection was there, but it was smiling, while he was not. Daniel froze. Slowly, the reflection tilted its head, the smile stretching unnaturally wide, eyes darkening into hollow pits. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, as the reflection lifted its hand and pointed directly at the wardrobe. The tapping resumed. With shaking hands, Daniel turned toward the wardrobe again. The door was slightly open now, though he hadn't touched it. From the crack, a pale hand with long fingers slid out, nails scraping the wooden floor. The lights in the room flickered and died. Darkness swallowed everything except for the faint outline of that hand crawling out. Daniel ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Behind him, the wardrobe creaked wide open. From within, something stepped out. Tall, faceless, its body stretching unnaturally as if made of shadows. The mirror shattered. Daniel screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. The next morning, the innkeeper entered the room. The bed was neatly made, the wardrobe closed. No sign of Daniel. Only the mirror, cracked and dark, reflected a faint smile.